Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. My name is Julie Bogas. I'm a PwC ESG consulting partner, and I work with clients on building their ESG or sustainability capabilities related to ESG strategy, impact assessment, goal setting, disclosures and reporting, and more frequently now, data governance and technology. I more commonly work with clients in the consumer products, automotive, and industrial products space, but I've had the opportunity to work with clients in financial services, medical device, retail, and technology industries as well. And I'm joined here today with John McGrath of AWS. John, would you mind sharing a brief introduction with our audience?
Sure, thanks, Julie. My name's John McGrath. I'm based in San Francisco. I'm a sustainability business development manager at AWS. And what that means is I work with customers both to make their use of the cloud more sustainable, consume fewer resources, and also to use the AWS cloud to meet their larger sustainability business objectives. And we do that across industries. So certainly in financial services, but also in energy, power and utilities, transportation, consumer packaged goods. It's quite broad.
Thanks, John. I'm so excited to have you here today to have this brief conversation about a topic we're both passionate about, ESG, or environmental, social, or governance, and sustainability. I'll probably use those words interchangeably today. I think between the two of us, we can bring a unique perspective to the group out there today. So I'll add a little bit more of context around our ESG mission and vision at PwC and where I come into the mix. Our PwC practice in the area of ESG combines the strength of our traditional capabilities and strategy, operations, finance, technology, and of course, audit or assurance and tax with the expertise around the most material or most significant ESG impacts, risks, and opportunities our clients are facing. So therefore, we can help them set strategies and goals for those impacts, along with supporting foundation in terms of people, process, technology capabilities to measure and manage those impacts over time. Right now, I'm personally working with clients around refining ESG strategies, goal setting, particularly around carbon emissions, and more leveraging technology and information governance processes to manage ESG data that's used to track those goals or to make internal decisions and, of course, for external disclosure. So, John, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you on your perspective and AWS. So do you mind sharing your point of view from a technology lens?
Sure. So, I think at the highest level, we see more companies getting serious about doing reporting as a first step towards taking action. And that's a data-intensive endeavor. So at the same time, a lot of companies are in early steps or their early phases of this journey and trying to put together frameworks to figure out what they need to collect, where and how to collect it. So a lot of the conversations we have start at a high level, that talking about business objectives and strategic goals, and then evolve towards implementation. This is what we need to do. How do we go about it? And I think we have a bit of a kind of a blind wall perspective across industries and across all kinds of different customers, which we're able to bring into the conversation, and that's useful.
Absolutely, and that's where we work with clients a lot as well on that. What is needed, where, and how to collect data. So for our audience today, we know that many of the companies represented may be at various stages of their journey within sustainability and ESG. What do you see out there? What have you seen as some of the biggest pressures that our clients are facing?
So I think access to capital and financial pressure has exploded recently. Even companies that aren't necessarily seeking investment, that's conveyed the seriousness of the need to address this. I think also, this depends on jurisdiction somewhat, but there are regulatory pressures for accurate reporting. There are a lot of drivers of this, but for I think probably many in this audience, those are two of them. I think a third, though, actually worth mentioning is there are a lot of sustainability reports and commitments have been made. Those are typically made in good faith, but sometimes a little bit in advance of a plan for how to get there. So I think, that companies' own good intentions, you could say, are often an important driver. Those are just some of the drivers we're seeing. What about you?
Very, very similar, and as you mentioned, the extent to which those pressures exist may vary across industry. But one of the key things that's a struggle for all is data. So that commonality of lack of data or too much data or inconsistent data in disparate systems, or data that maybe the companies can't trust. We're working with clients on figuring out where to start to get your arms around these data issues and which topics, ESG topics or metrics, to tackle first when it comes to data, because it will definitely seem like boiling the ocean to tackle everything at one time, and really dig in and understand those issues. But I know data is an area that you have a lot of perspective on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you said really resonates. Consistency of data can make it very difficult to combine the sources you need to get an accurate picture of your whole organization. So one thing we frequently work with customers on is creating, well, we call it a data lake, a single repository where you can bring in data from different sources and normalize it. Say, this data from one system of record we can have that speak to some external data source. The challenges of combining external data with internal data, you really need to get sophisticated eventually about avoiding isolated pockets of data that need to talk to each other.
So those are all great points, Jen. And regardless of industry, data is definitely a topic that it's hard to get your arms around. So one of the things you can do to help think about that is, once you've identified all of your data points across your disclosures, you may have 30, 50, 100 different metrics, but taking a few techniques to cut that data and identify those that you're perhaps most concerned about from a risk perspective, or even those that are the low-hanging fruit that might be easier than others to get from the disparate data sources into that data lake. But start thinking even on a one-by-one basis, what are all my sources, and how can I start to plan out that map to get those into the data lake? That's something that all industries can think about. Are there any particular topics that you want to share today around specific industry considerations or trends that you're finding your customers are thinking about?
There definitely are nuances between industries, but I think you touched on something very important that I'll just expand on before diving into any industry specifics, and that's that the notion of the perfect being the enemy of the good. It's a cliche, but I feel like a parrot. I say it a lot because you definitely see companies draw a map, and it gets bigger and bigger, and it delays and becomes intimidating, and it delays starting. And it's possible to do those in parallel. All right, we know for sure we're going to have to do this, so let's get rolling while we look at the rest of the landscape. I think particularly companies and industries that are a bit newer to this, and I'll say oil and gas, since you asked a moment ago about trends within industries, this was an afterthought, I think, for many of them until recently. In the trends we talked about earlier, these concerns rose to the sea level, and they're at the beginning of the journey. And I think maybe because a lot of them are engineers, I'm not really sure, but I definitely see a lot of folks saying, all right, we need to have sensors on everything, and we need to do all these very specific things before we flip on the big switch. And that is, you need to get started. That kind of pattern is going to be, it's going to be hard to achieve your aims in a reasonable time frame. I'd love to know if you're seeing the same thing or your opinion on that.
I think that's a terrific point of don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. The end game actually on some of this won't ever feel perfect. There are going to be some assumptions that need to be modeled, and that applies to other parts of business and financial reporting as well. There are assumptions that go into things, and if you spend all your time trying to get to the perfect picture of what the end state will look like before you get started, you're very unlikely to get started. So I think that's a great point. And using those different techniques to figure out this it feels impossible, but where can we start now while figuring out some of these harder things in the background, such as different aspects of different scope 3 categories or value chain carbon emission categories, other data that exist outside the organization. Frankly, standards and frameworks for some things that don't yet exist or are under revision as we speak. there are things, no regrets things that each company can get started on now. I love that tip on don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Any other tips for our audience today?
I think we see a tension between the notion of estimation and measurement. And I think it relates to this desire to nail everything, to have, I wouldn't even say perfect, but like a very high standard. Of course, we all want a high standard eventually, but even a lot of the protocols around estimation of the carbon footprint, specifically like the greenhouse gas protocol gives guidance, make a general estimate as a starting point, be transparent about it. You're not trying to misrepresent anything, and then improve upon it. So certain industries too, that where they're more technical in nature and it's possible to instrument everything, people go right to that, and that just is going to take a long time. You'll never get it perfectly correct. It's a laudable goal, but put it down the road after you're at least producing some sort of estimate or number or something tangible you can work with.
John, anything you've seen in your experience in terms of training and change management being key success factors?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, you're once again, I'm in complete agreement with the need for that, and I'll go back to my sort of the axe I'm always grinding, which is not to let it stop you from action. One way I've seen people do that is bring in consultants. If you need people with expertise, don't let your lack of it stop you. Buy it. There is a progression, I think, from having external help and then bringing that knowledge in-house. There's also, and it's similar to the tooling progression. A lot of times you're going to bring in folks to help you. They're going to be emailing spreadsheets around. That seems to be the way everybody starts. And over time, you'll both develop the knowledge in-house to be doing that, but hopefully take a step beyond it and get into the data issues we described earlier. Another pattern we see is hiring externally expertise. Not that there's not enormous benefits in cultivating it in-house, but if you want to get moving quickly, I think those are two paths to it. It's deep, I think a lot of companies in the beginning of their journey just anoint somebody as the sustainability person. They get a great start, but it's a real field with nuance and depth to it. So over time, you're going to have to treat it like any other, business function with specialists.
It's a great point you make, and I really appreciate the point about talking about taking stock of where you have capabilities you might need to augment from the outside. And you just made me think along the way of also thinking about how do you leverage the technology and tools you already have in other parts of the business. You earlier mentioned a data lake. This doesn't necessarily mean a brand new data lake, does it? Or are there ways that you can leverage capability you already have?
Yeah, that's a great point. It also, you can just start with spreadsheets, a simple database. I think even the notion of a data lake, some people are unfamiliar with the term. It implies big data, and indeed, it can be a very sophisticated thing. I think another important point that brings up is that you have this data lying around in different places. Some of it is buried in your ERP system, some of it in your HR systems. You want to flow that into a data lake, but in the meanwhile, you can just run a report, stick it into Excel, and get started. Eventually, you want to be putting that in a place where it can be collated and correlated. But oftentimes, you have a lot of what you need already.
Yeah, so both look for opportunities to bring in, augment your own expertise, but also don't go it alone within your own organization. Understand what infrastructure might already be there to help you. What are some of the internal technology capabilities that you might have that can help you achieve some of what John just said? Well, John, we really appreciate you being here with us today. Hopefully, we've provided a little bit of an overview that our audience can benefit with and moving from concept to action.
Thank you.